So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to talk about the glowing districts of Tartaria. And by this, we mean we're talking about the white cities of Tartaria and the white cities built all over the world. We obviously had the world fairs as well that was built, that were kind of used on top of these. But I am joined with my incredible brother as always. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
Hello, Zach. I'm doing very well, and I hope all's good with you.
Very good, my brother. Excellent. And so, first and foremost, let's discuss. There's been so many of these white cities around. We'll come on to all the locations a bit later, but so tell us a little bit more about what these cities were and how they were actually functioning as a city.
Well, as we've discussed in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, these glowing districts of Tartaria and the Old World Empire, these white cities that were so incredibly developed around the healing temples in Great Tartaria, were electrified 24 hours a day by the use of the ether that was drawn down into electrical capacitors in the ground floor and basement areas of all of the different premises in these white cities across Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. So we know that these glowing districts were incredibly luminescent. In the night times, they shimmered with incredible iridescence. They were spectral, in many ways, incredibly ethereal, and as a very different type of energetic resonance would be emitted from these glowing districts or white cities of Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire, whether it was in northern Russia, parts of the Caucasus region, Eastern Europe, and obviously across North America and South America and like India and Australia, as you mentioned. So we know that this old world empire based much of its existence on the use of drawing down the telluric electricity or the ether from the atmosphere above these various glowing districts. And we know that it was an integral part of the healing. And this was obviously for biological and medicinal purposes, but also for the psychological and the mental health of these Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples and the various other inhabitants of the colonies of the Old World Order of Great Tartaria.
So, how was this energy coming from the ether? All right. So this wasn't just an electrical energy that they used to power their buildings. It wasn't just that. There was actually this ethereal energy was actually a healing energy as well. So
Yes,
this ether that was they had tapped into, all these buildings were harnessing this energy from. It was drawing the energy
that's
into the
right.
buildings,
Yeah.
and then you had the churches, the cathedrals, and all these magnificent ornate buildings, right?
That's
And
right. It was a multifaceted composite of different factors. So the luminiferous ether was drawn down. We can call it as, as I've been mentioning previous to this, telluric electricity from the atmosphere. It was channeled into the ground areas or the basement areas and into electrical capacitors in the various premises, the stately homes, the palaces, the
I
healing temples, many of which then got repurposed.
just say with the capacitors, explain that a little bit
Yeah.
and what was going on there. So the energy would, and it was stored in these capacitors,
That's
right?
right. An electrical capacitor can be defined as an accumulator and storage unit of electricity. So that's what was going on. And then that would be distributed through, obviously metallic insulated cables through the basement or ground floor areas of these premises in the glowing districts of Great Tartaria and the Old World Order. And the other aspect was there was on the roof lines of pretty much most of these different buildings, where the stately homes, palaces, healing temples, there was aerials, there was antennae, obviously. What we now know is chapels, churches, and cathedrals have spires, they have steeples, and these were used to create a steady flow within these architectural features of the telluric electricity or the luminiferous ether down into these buildings. So we can see that actually Tartarian architecture in these white cities was an integral, multifaceted composite factor in
Mm.
the actual even or equated distribution of the ether or the telluric electricity either across the airwaves above the roof lines of these buildings, whether in northern Russia or anywhere else, you know, and also through these ground floor or basement electrical capacitors that were effectively electrical storage units. So there was always a boundless amount of this telluric electricity to be used for heating and lighting, and then obviously reserves that could build up. And a capacitor, could store up to huge amounts in terms of voltage of this telluric electricity to be used at a later stage. Could have been used for obviously street lighting or for transportation and various other purposes.
In the sense of the healing side of it, that's what's so interesting about it.
Would definitely been some method of calibration and also using some kind of electrical adjusters so they kept a balanced and equated energetic resonance of this telluric electricity. So in terms of the harmonic frequencies that it was creating in these glowing districts of Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire, it was a perpetual and ongoing form of healing taking place. So it didn't require, obviously, these parishioners or the laity to attend the healing temples unless they wished to, for choral singing, to the use of the tuning forks, the metallic pipe organs, stained glass windows, and so forth, with the quartz crystal glass and with the photonic wavelengths that were coming through, combined with the sound resonances from the tuning forks and the orchestras and the metallic pipe organs and the voices of the adults and the children in those premises. You could actually have healing going on, walking along the pavements, walking in the actual inner city parks of Great Tartaria. It was an ongoing process, restorative, perpetual. It was equated. And so these Nordic Tartarians, the Turkic peoples, and all the other inhabitants of the Old World Empire, they literally, in a unified way, were consistently benefiting from the use of telluric electricity. It was really the most integral expression of that defined the civilization of Great Tartaria. There were many other things, but even the Tartarian architecture, really, in an effective manner and perspective, was really there to be used to channel in an even and steady manner the telluric electricity, again, for healing purposes, and more importantly than physical health, for these Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples and others in the Old World Empire, was the use of it for their own mental health, their own spiritual development, and moving towards focusing where possible in their daily lives on the Christ awareness as an individualized expression and personalized expression of their divine love for the universal creator. So
It'd
there
be
was a
very low frequency, almost like a very low hum, almost like a vibration that would have
yeah.
kind of resonated through a very low hertz, basically.
Well, I think we know from the luminiferous ether there was so much of this telluric electricity being drawn down into these glowing districts that shimmered in it. They were so incredibly chromatic in the sky, the skies and the nighttime. You can imagine them shimmering with different hues of reds and blues and greens and yellows and purples and so forth. And what we have to remember is if all of this was really intended to keep people in an ambient state of inner peace, stillness, there had to have been that almost electrostatic atmosphere created over these glowing districts, these white cities of Great Tartaria on a constant basis to ensure that the inhabitants, these Nordic Tartarians, the Turkic peoples, and everybody else who are part of the Old World Empire fully benefited. And so, because it was all free, it was boundless, it was limitless. There wasn't any sense of, a financial charge or the idea that people had to pay or the inhabitants had to pay for the use of this telluric electricity, as we've discussed in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, and how with the collapse of Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire, obviously that entire perceptivity then started to rapidly change.
But although they didn't pay for electric, do you think there would have been, or energy? Do you think there would have been other forms of payment? We've never actually got into that, but just with the sense of trade and a bartering system of some nature, was it?
I think there was an interface that went on. So in the actual countries and the land masses of Great Tartaria in the Old World Empire, we know they had an intricate and quite profoundly or sophisticated looking bartering type system. So that's one aspect, but then they didn't control the entire planet Earth. There was, shall we say, competing forces in terms of individuals or groupings, policymakers, and so forth. That actually had a system, yes, where there was financial exchanges, where there was third-party debt usury, and so forth, and banking. With that, that's historically, obviously, fully verifiable. You can see all that. So there would have had to have been a some kind of interface, some kind of interrelationship between those who are bartering in Great Tartaria within the glowing districts or the white cities of Great Tartaria, and how they related or traded in terms of commercialism with these countries that were outside of, shall we say, the spiritual jurisdiction of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, whether that was in northern Russia or Caucasus region or Eastern Europe and so forth. And we know that when it comes to northern Russia, in terms of archaeological researches and excavations, there's been thousands of those done and completed. But what we now know as the Russian Federation. And this goes back into the period of Russian communism and so forth, and the Soviet Union. And coins haven't been found in any abundance
No,
in
I
those
haven't.
areas. But if you then look at some of the archaeological excavations, say, that have gone on here over the last 150 to
Oh, they go
200
back
years.
500 years, yeah, 1,000 years even.
Yeah, but just in the modern age, say in the United Kingdom of Great Britain or in Western Europe,
Mm.
thousands and thousands of coins and artifacts from the Roman Empire have been found, as an
Yeah,
example. So that's interesting to note. And so also we know from the climate of northern Russia, which it's frigid sub-zero temperatures there. So if water moisture is frozen, then logic would dictate in certain areas there should be a better level of preservation of coinage and so forth.
of
That
course.
has, but obviously there has been artifacts that have been found and vast remains, as I've discussed, with these crystal pyramids or pyramids of light, or the granite pyramids, the pyramids of luminescence, that go back to the civilization of Hyperborea that had existed with such prevalence in the Arctic North Polar region and northern Russia. So that's interesting to note. So yeah, it
Mm.
looks like there was some kind of intricate or sophisticated bartering that took place as a form of trade and commercialism amongst the Nordic Tatarians and the Turkic peoples.
So, Steve, you had the biggest world fair, which both me and you believe that these buildings were there before, and like a lot of people who look into the Columbian World Fair, which is the World Columbian Exposition of 1893. This
Yeah,
apparent whole city was built in 2 years, which is pretty impossible at that time, but it's kind of it's just enough, for people to accept it. But there is certainly, that with the white cities and of Chicago, that Chicago is a magnificent area, and that whole what's happened to that whole district as well. See the Chicago World Fair. Let's talk about that. And this, I reckon these buildings went back a lot further, right? And obviously it's called Chicago, but in the old world it was called Shalaga.
that's correct. Yeah. So, well, I mean, we know that the World's Columbian Exposition, also the Chicago's World Fair, which was facilitated and held from the 5th of May 1893 to the 31st of October 1893 in Jackson Park and Midway Plaisance in Chicago in the eastern United States, was really a summational celebration that absorbed the remnant buildings that had the designs and features of Tartarian architecture of the Old World Empire from Shalaga
Yeah.
into the transitional state of perception that the policymakers wanted the American people to start to adopt when it came to embracing the industrial age and therefore the industrial revolution, this mechanization of thought and the removal or suppression of any idea of Christ awareness and spiritual development of the individual, and obviously the usage of boundless telluric electricity. So when that whole that celebration in terms of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago came to an end, what you see is the mass demolition of pretty much
mm,
all of these buildings, the remnants of the glowing districts or white cities of Great Tartaria on that part of the North American continent. So again, it actually was a celebration that became another kind of deletion, the erasing of true history,
mm.
and in terms of the external perceptions that were given to that true history by the American people, living as sole personalities that have incarnated here on planet Earth in this 3D holographic reality we call the material dimension, where this stagecraft was played out in front of them.
Mm.
And so they would adopt through predictive programming and culture creation what the policymakers wanted them to believe was going to be the way forward in the modern age, the industrial age. This is what they wanted them to perceive.
And
And
obviously,
they
the
would
biggest, one of the biggest acts there was the incubator babies, wasn't it? I mean,
incubator babies again. So, I mean, these kind, and again, in terms of these glowing districts or white cities of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, these incubator babies, you couldn't really have all this very synthetic,
mm,
perverted, and deviated mechanization and sort of unspiritual practices, for want of a better phrase, going on,
mm,
unless they were going on in these vast internecine urban conurbations and settlements, as with the cityscape of Shalaga, this
yeah.
white city as it had formerly been as part of Great Tartaria, but then it became known as Chicago.
It
So
was a
we,
complete inversion in these
yeah,
places, wasn't it? I mean, the World Fair is
yeah,
almost inverted what the original purpose was.
yeah,
And obviously, to the public, the World Fairs were displaying this new way of living, this
yeah,
new way of life that is
yeah.
so grand and beautiful. But
Well,
yeah,
we know that, when you take a look at the architecture in these glowing districts or white cities, such as in the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, you can clearly see the features there display Tartarian architecture. They're definable
definitely.
in that sense as aspects and important integral aspects of the old world empire of Great Tartaria.
Yeah.
For example, you had the administration building, the horticultural building, the electrical building, interesting, the women's building, so the chocolate Mania Pavilion and the machinery hall. So here we have the machinery hall, the electrical building at the World's Columbian Exposition or the Chicago World's Fair.
Mm.
So that's interesting. You can see it went from the eloquence of these white cities. It was a farewell to the old world empire, the old world order of the distant past that really has its historical links and origination within the antediluvian period. That's the historical timeline before the first great flood and the second great flood. Going back really to much of what was known as Hyperborea.
When
And
do you
so
think, when do you just say, when do you think them buildings are actually built?
I think
That,
many of them were built during the late medieval period. I think a lot
right.
of them, I don't think they go back thousands of years.
No,
I think that a lot of the occult technology that had been developed in Great Tartarian northern Russia was centered, as I said before, really the whole civilization around the usage of the luminiferous ether or this telluric electricity that
yeah.
created these perpetual glowing districts or and opalescent white cities that would shimmer in the sunlight and were iridescent with so much different chromatic variation in the nighttime, 7 days of the week, all year round.
Mm,
I think they developed out of this kind of occult technology the ability to cut huge stone blocks, and they were experts in the use of concrete, the molding of concrete. And I think all of this really had been developed by the Nordic Tatarians and many of the Turkic peoples during the late medieval periods. So going back, at least 400 years or so, maybe a bit more. So I'd say that was definitely the case. And we've discussed in Sacred Wisdom podcast before, the whole situation that occurred with the arising of early Tartaria and the very important or essential historical involvement that the Golden Horde of Genghis Khan had, with the Mongol Empire in the development, the founding of early Tartaria. So
mm,
I'd say from that time on, with the emergence of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, out of the rudimentary basics of the civilization defined as early Tartaria, we see these construction techniques starting to move forward and progress.
So anyone that's new to this, if you're not aware, there are a lot of these cities built around the world. So this is where it gets really interesting. And you start
Yeah,
looking into it more and you realize the San Francisco, it was called the Panama Pacific International Exposition. And that was in San Francisco
yeah,
a little bit later, but 1915. But this again was a whole white city, an
yeah,
incredible white city as well. Beautiful ornate buildings, similar as well with the layout. But these were all over. But you also had, which is going over to India, which
yeah.
is where it gets really interesting, which is the city of Lucknow.
Hmm.
And obviously, you had the siege of Lucknow, which
Hmm.
the British Empire part of in the 1800s. That was around 1857, the siege of Lucknow. So again, that turning point of the industrial age, and that whole city was destroyed. There was an amazing city there, and that was a pure white city, I believe.
Yes, it was
Um,
beautiful buildings. The glowing districts of Lucknow, or the White City of Lucknow. It was a beautiful Tartarian architecture was very clearly discernible in that location in India, and again was another classic example, really, of the deletion process going on of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire in stages. We have to remember that this whole deletion process was not a singular event. Obviously, we discussed in tremendous detail
no.
in previous Sacred Wisdom podcast the first mud flood, second mud flood, third mud flood, and all the other extenuating natural disasters, earthquakes, sea quakes, and so forth. A
And
lot
just
of
to say,
stuff
with
was
the
going
mud,
on.
just to say to people with the mud floods, it wasn't just a mud flood, right? Stephen just said it. There was other things that happened
Yeah,
that obviously created a movement, that created a lot of migration.
yeah.
So from northern Russia into Europe, that was a big catalyst for it. But there was other things that happened, wasn't there?
Well, we know there was we had a lot of during these times. You go back at the documentation on what weather patterns or climatic conditions were going on during these timeline dates, whether the first mud flood, second mud flood, third mud flood. You can see that there was a lot of sub-zero temperatures. The winter times for example, northern Russia were absolutely horrendous. We know the same was going on in parts of obviously Scandinavia, Western Europe, and coming right the way across to a North American continent, especially on the American Eastern Seaboard and going up into parts of Canada. We know that it was
Yep.
really extremely bad. And obviously, the thawing that took place would have led to and torrential rainstorms that came in, and thunder and lightning, and
Famine.
also volcanic activity blotting out the sunlight with sulfurous ashes, creating huge cloud layers combined.
Yep.
So there's a multifaceted reasons behind the eventual collapse of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire that
There's
actually
kind of a
took
lot
place
of
over a long period, a long duration. It wasn't just a one-off event.
There's a lot of mockery, though, you see, people say about the whole idea of Tartaria, and they put it down. And they're like, oh, it was destroyed by the mud floods. Like
No,
it was just, well, this mud flood just came down and wiped out. And it's kind of
no.
put across in a really stupid way. But there,
No, because
these
that again, you see that when it comes to understanding, this is why if you look at, I mean, again, we discussed the various cartographic diagrams, the medieval maps
you
that
can
were
clearly see it shrinks down. Yeah.
etched and designed by so many cartographers, both here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, but also in countries like France and Belgium, the Netherlands and Germany. And what we know is that the Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, its actual territories decreased over time, and you can
Yeah.
clearly see that from the map. So you see the emergence of Muscovite Tartary, which
That's
then
right.
became Western Russia. We see the emergence of Oriental Tartary, or Cathay, which
Yeah.
is the region today known as Western China, and so we can see it was decreasing over time.
But Tartaria was just a desert,
Yeah,
it was nothing more. And there was people, but we managed to draw all the detail on the map and put lots of
yeah,
temples and
yeah.
other things on there and lots of names, but we just called it Tartaria.
We,
I love the way it's
yeah.
quite comedic, the way it's put across on Wikipedia as what Tartaria was. It's quite shocking, really.
Well, I mean, if you look, for example, yeah, it is shocking. And when you look at some of these from the medieval period or the Middle Ages, you look at these cartographic diagrams. They're very detailed when it comes to the
Yep.
topographic features of Great Tartaria in northern Russia and elsewhere. We have to remember they actually list hundreds and hundreds of towns, and these white cities are clearly listed.
Yeah.
We can see that those that have very prominent features, they show those such as a spire or a steeple in the outline of what appears to be some kind of cathedral. Some
Yeah.
of them appear to have diagrams of small four-sided buildings that we would know as, Tartarian pyramids. Then you have to, we know that if, for example, in the Russian Federation now in the modern age, there was the funding and the determination and the organization to go out there and start doing archaeological excavations in these areas. And for example, we know that there were huge amounts of these white cities that had been constructed along the banks of the Volga River, the Yenisei River, the Viloy River, and the Kolyma River, and also in the actual the Arctic coastline of northern Russia. We see this, the Russian Arctic coast. We see that there was a huge number of these white cities built. So there was an interrelationship with the extraction of piezoelectric currents from the salt water. We know that we can see that from many remnant buildings that are scattered across certain land masses that are near to the Norwegian Sea, the White Sea, the Kara Sea, the Laptev Sea, the East Siberian Sea, the Chukchi Sea, and the Bering Sea.
Just
And
on
these,
summary, that's northern Russia, isn't it?
it's all, oh, yeah,
Along
all
the tip.
related,
Yeah.
yeah, geographically and topographically to northern Russia, and obviously that all of that really is very much part of the Arctic North Polar region to some extent. So we know that this again could go back into the antediluvian period to the time of the civilization of Hyperborea.
Yeah.
And again, it would take only a few teams of academics to go out to some of these locations that are listed as these glowing districts or white cities of Great Tartaria, in northern Russia that were
Mm.
pretty much incredibly important to the old world empire that had been proliferated from northern Russia to so many colonies around planet Earth.
Yeah.
We know that the Great Tartaria existed, and all they had to do is do those archaeological excavations and remove all that silt and the clay and the soil and the gravel in these sub-zero tundras and find what is really waiting to be discovered, which is these remnants of so many of these buildings from these white cities of Great Tartaria that were buried and concealed during the first mud flood, the second mud flood, and the third mud flood. And then we can actually start having a really positive conversation with academics from Western science about the rewriting and the correcting of the historical timelines, and actually getting a much clearer perception of what went on, historically here on planet Earth, not the
Yeah.
edited version that has been used to conceal the fact that Great Tartaria was a civilization and it did exist in northern Russia and many other locations as part of the Old World Empire for many, many centuries.
Yeah. And it's true. And all over, like, we talk about South America, the Amazon and
Yeah.
all this, but in South America, you had the Independence Centenary International Exposition, and this was a white city, an amazing white city where Rio de Janeiro is now. And
Mhm.
it was incredible buildings again, and all very similar to the white cities, the Chicago World Fair, all this stuff. And it's like how we've kind of got to this point where we've accepted a story that these were just built for these expositions is kind
Yeah.
of kind of a joke. You
That's
doesn't
right.
take
It
it's
is.
about 15 minutes and you'll start to see a lot of flaws in
Yeah.
that story. But just as a passing story, you could probably get away with it just in passing, you know
Yeah.
and it's
Well,
part of
you
the
can get
past, so
away.
it doesn't really
People.
matter,
Well,
but
most of the American people, the Europeans, any individual who's given that information, unless they're going to use discernment and critical thinking, would probably just sort of nonchalantly just accept that what they've been
Of
given
course.
is inverted commas factual,
Yeah.
and in fact it's not factual. What they've been given is an edited, reworked, rehashed version of what the policymakers want them to perceive as actualized facts, inverted commas, that can be defined as parts of the 3D holographic reality, this material dimension that really happened in the past. When they didn't, other events happened, and then they've rewritten it as really as an historical excuse they give for
Yeah.
certain things, and then that's just accepted as a consensus form of this material world, and then it's taught on syllabuses in schools, colleges, and universities, and it's rinse, repeat, two, three
Well, yeah.
generations in, it's accepted as factual. And then anyone that's against that is a conspiracy theorist, isn't thinking correctly, is probably a bit eccentric, maybe they're mad, insane, weird, when actually, and that's what they're actually speaking about is the facts, is the truth, but it
Yeah.
is largely going to be ignored when it comes to Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire.
Well, because
And
the majority that agree that it didn't exist, you see.
yeah,
But he who controls the past controls the present. He who controls the present controls the future.
that's right.
It's very
Absolutely.
simple. It's
Yeah.
very easy to understand that. It makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
that people in positions of power want to control history.
But that's right.
It's
Absolutely. And that's what really human beings are up against in terms of trying to bring a re-emergence of focusing on the Christ awareness and individualized spiritual development as integral to both the Western world and every other aspect of existence here on planet Earth. That's all just being pushed aside. But these are really principles that we must exist by and
of course.
understand how important they are and how they relate to the past, to Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. And it's not so much in my thinking, it's not so much that it's being covered up. It's why, and we have discussed why extensively in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, as to why the civilization of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, why was it so important for the elites, the secret societies to cover all this up? What was so important about that civilization that it had to be deleted
It
from
can
the
be control.
historical
It
timeline?
was a control mechanism, and I mean
Yeah.
that's the ultimate key of it. I mean, as long as the policymakers could keep control, they won't care what system's in place.
No.
To
But
be
then
honest,
again, if you have a situation where you explain to people that spiritual principles and focusing on the Christ consciousness or whatever you want to phrase it as was seen as absolutely utmost in a civilization where there was no currency, there was no banking, there was no third party debt usury, that had, limitless or boundless the usage of the luminiferous ether in the form of telluric electricity for heating, lighting, transportation, and healing purposes, that
yeah,
they had this incredible occult technology and therefore could create beautifully ornate buildings with this, the definable Tartarian architecture that
mm,
itself was used to complement in an interfaceted composite way, the equated usage of that telluric electricity to create an ambience in terms of an electrostatic atmosphere above these glowing districts or white cities of Great Tartaria.
yeah,
Suddenly you've got a massive contrast in terms of the socio-cultural and socio-economic perceptions amongst, the peoples of planet Earth, whether they're the American people, whether they're Western Europeans, or whoever it is. Suddenly you've got this massive contrast. Why is it every other civilization has been about really some form of debt control, whether it, and banking? It's always been about, things like warfare, geopolitical stagecraft. It's all about individuals and families having to make ends meet, and paying for utilities such as paying for the usage of water, the
yeah,
usage of electricity or gas supplies into domestic properties or residencies alongside commercial and industrial premises. Why suddenly there's this, and that contrast alone saying, hang on, there was this civilization called Great Tartaria. They had these glowing districts or white cities. They had boundless usage of this telluric electricity. They had no money, no banking, no debt.
mm,
Their civilization was allowed to spiritually develop.
yeah.
and many of the Nordic Tartarians and these Turkic peoples wanted to share as tutors, as guiders, as teachers, as facilitators, this kind of knowledge with
Mm,
many other Homo sapiens or human beings around planet Earth. And
mm,
so all these different inhabitants looked to Great Tartaria, looked to northern Russia, looked into the faraway north where the remnants of Hyperborea still exist today.
mm.
And suddenly you've got that contrast. And then the question then is, why are we all living the way we are living in the Western world and everywhere else when there was this incredible civilization that existed that
Mm.
faded into iniquity and has been suppressed and being deleted from historical timelines? Because then that would help to create a shift in human consciousness,
Yeah, it also activates the memory, the cellular memory
activates
of
the
people.
memory.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And therefore, then people would start focusing more on the Christ awareness. There would be an adulation and an emphasis placed on the having divine love towards the universal creator of heaven and earth and
Mm,
every eternal parallel dimension, parallel reality, and parallel universe forever and ever and ever.
yeah,
Prayer and meditation would start to really re-emerge. The importance of spiritual psychology would be given far more emphasis, and we
yeah.
would see these huge shifts in terms of frequency, vibration, and energetic resonance.
Mm,
And ironically, you would see within 2 to 3 generations the re-emergence of these glowing districts and
yeah.
these newly reformed white cities of the modern age, but really complementing Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. But at the moment, that's obviously not going to happen. But we know in 9.5 years, maybe a bit more,
Yeah,
around 2034 to 2035 onwards, we
I agree.
will start to see the basic rudimentary vibrational shifts taking place that will define the emergence of this new golden age or golden period. But it would take many, many years after that to really reach a flourishing state of blissfulness for all Homo sapiens or human beings on planet Earth.
What? Yeah, I just want to mention about the White City. We mentioned this before, but the White City of London, which is actually called White City, the area now.
Yeah,
So you had the Imperial International Exhibition, which is in 1909, and
that's
this
right.
was all the White City. And this again had buildings called the Grand Restaurant, the Palace of Women's Work, the Garden Club Palace, the Congress Hall. Congress
Yeah.
Hall is interesting because we don't use Congress in this country. So
No,
it's like,
Congress
so,
is interesting as a word because it connects to the Roman Empire. So there you go. That's
right.
all connected to maritime law. But obviously, you've got the United States Congress.
Yes,
So
that's what I was.
yeah, so it's very interesting that was used. Congress was
But they
used.
actually held the Olympic Games at this White City
They
as
did.
well. This and a bit later, and then again, just all completely knocked down. And if you
Mm.
go down to this area now, it is Westfield Shopping Centre, and
Yes.
it was
Yeah.
actually left derelict for like 30 years. So that was
Yeah.
kind of interesting. There's little remnants of some of the old World Fair, the names of the cafes and
Oh,
restaurants around there. They're sort of they're tied in with the memory of that old World Fair.
that's
People are
right.
so anonymous to that because obviously we had World War I, World War II, and
Yeah.
these are just forgotten about. But that
Yeah.
period is it. I mean, I don't. I mean, we'll never know. We'll never know about the true history. But that seemed to me to be an old. These were very old world buildings, and that whole part of London, to be honest, there were lots of old world buildings around there.
Yeah. I
But
mean
yeah, I
that
just wanted to
whole the
mention
whole
that
in
it was amazing.
absolutely, it was amazing. Yeah, and the Imperial International Exhibition in White City, which for those of you who don't know is a suburb in London that's very near to Shepherd's Bush, Notting Hill, and Holland and Park.
Mm,
In what is known as West London, and this Imperial International Exhibition took place from the 20th of May 1909 to the 20th of October 1909, and it was really though between those two dates we have to really understand that was really the exiting of the glowing district or White City, itself in West London, that remnant archaeological um, ensign from Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire,
yeah.
so that clearly defined Tartarian architecture in such majestic and eloquent ways. When you see the photographs
And just
of
to say, could I
that
just say on the
exhibition, it's
build?
incredible.
I just want to say on the building records because I looked in. There are no building records whatsoever. Two people apparently
That is unusual, isn't it? That is very
to that whole
strange,
place.
really.
Now they
Yeah.
said they were deleted because of immigrant workers, because basically they couldn't, because it was illegal at that time for certain work conditions conveniently, but
Yeah.
they didn't have any work records for that reason, so they managed to, I mean, it's unbelievable, it's a huge structure.
Yeah, it was when you see like aerial photographs of the Imperial International Exhibition in
Yeah,
White City in West London. It is such a beautiful urban conurbation. I mean, really, you can really visualize, actually effectively visualize that in Great Tatar and the Old World Empire, that kind of white city with all its glowing districts completely electrified, drawing down the boundless luminiferous ether or telluric electricity onto metallic aerials, arrays, steeples, and spires, transmitting it across the airwaves, or being that telluric electricity being drawn down from the atmosphere into these electrical capacitors in the ground floor and basement areas of stately homes, palaces, healing temples that then went on many to be repurposed as chapels, churches, and cathedrals. With the collapse of Great Tartaria, we can see so much reconfiguration, remodeling, repurposing going on. And it was really another one of these public gatherings that just said a big farewell to Great Tartaria. It was a
yeah,
celebration, a bit like, it's like
funny celebration, just knocking
yes,
buildings down, completely
yeah.
insane.
Well, it is. It's a big farewell. It's a big public farewell, saying, right, we're celebrating the end of all this now, and that's it. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. And we're into the industrial age, the modern age, and the mechanization of thought. This is the way forward. There's no more boundless, limitless,
No,
the free electricity to be used. Everything's going to be paid for, and you're all going to embrace third-party debt usury and the drudgery of mechanization, and your lives are going to be shaped in this direction.
I mean, it's
Um,
very serious that, but as you're
yeah,
saying all that, I do see a comedy because it is like a real joke the way this
yeah,
has happened. Imagine this day and age building something like St. Paul's,
yeah,
going and having a party there, and a few months later, somebody knocking it down. You look at the uproar that would happen.
yeah.
How it almost like
Imagine that they
got
bring like
away with that back then, and
yeah,
doing that, even if they were built in that period, just the fact they knocked them down is so
that's right.
destructive, it's so really horrible actually.
I mean, it can be theorized, and we have to consider this to be possibly the case, and therefore we're going to speculate here that when we look at the Imperial International Exhibition in White City in West London, what we may be looking at as is duplicate buildings that may have been constructed to emulate the style of Tartarian architecture, but weren't necessarily from Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire. Just
Possibly,
because certain documentation or certain types of records haven't been kept, just because there isn't vast amounts of black and white detailed photographs showing the stages of construction, it
yeah, of
doesn't automatically just mean yes,
course,
these various buildings are from the white cities of Great Tartaria and the Old World Empire, and we're confirming that this is some kind of conspiracy theory, and we're going to go along with that narrative. So just
yeah,
want to put that out there. Everything's
yeah,
out for
exactly,
consideration. We have to use logical discernment and not just make assumptions all the time. That
yeah.
it's the case that every single one of these buildings was part of the glowing districts or the white cities of Great Tartaria. Many of them may well have emulated the style of Tartarian architecture, not just in sort of West London. This could have happened all
It-
over
it-
parts of mainland Europe and North America. We just don't know the exact details of everything.
And
So,
very true, Steve. It's good to always have a logical approach to it, and that's very important. The thing is, with this White City World Fair, they had like canals and almost lakes, almost built around it, structures that would have taken a huge amount of time. Now,
yeah,
yeah, it's possible they were temporary, 100%, but then there was millions of people passing through them.
yeah,
Safety reasons. You've got to remember they held the Olympics there as well. There was a lot of people coming through there, so
yeah.
it would have been a safe,
Very popular with
temporary
Londoners.
buildings.
The
They would have
was
they
indeed.
it'd
Yeah,
been dangerous to actually go inside.
absolutely.
And
Yeah,
obviously, you did have some world fairs which were temporary
yeah.
structures, and they people that were hurt and stuff like that, where they that got damaged. But
Yeah,
the white cities go all over, and they're just some of them. And they go into Australia. They're all white cities.
they were.
But and Canada. You mentioned Canada. Also, as well, I mean, just actually on a trip to Wales last year, the around that whole Cardiff area, there are very suspect to some of them old buildings as well.
Yeah,
But you made me think when you said about the white city when we were just talking about the white cities of London, Birmingham again.
yeah.
Birmingham had these cities, and this was all not all gone after World
Yes,
War.
you see that if you go to, uh, you go up to Birmingham in Warwickshire, in the West Midlands, here in the United Kingdom, you have what is called the Bull Ring in the very central area
Mm,
of Birmingham, and some of the original buildings there. If you go back and look to the Victorian age and look at the black and white photos, some of them were incredibly beautiful
mm,
and clearly just had discernible features defined as Tartarian architecture.
mm.
And a lot of these buildings have now been completely demolished in the very central area around Birmingham New Street railway station.
Yeah.
And there are a few remnant buildings there from the Victorian age, some obviously built in the style of Art Deco. And
Mm.
you can see, and there's some buildings still there from the interwar period, but a lot of it's completely been demolished. It's so sanitized and synthetic there now.
Quite
And a lot of
unbelievable, isn't
it's
it?
just glass, steel, chrome, and concrete, and
So
it's
ugly. I don't.
nothing
I'm
of
sorry
any
to anybody that lives in
worth, really.
Birmingham, but it's very ugly, and
It is.
it's a
Yeah,
very ugly looking city, and it's a real shame.
yeah,
At least with London, it's kept that kind of old style. It seems like
yeah.
Birmingham's been kind of decimated.
Obliterated. Yeah,
Unbelievable, really,
yeah,
and it's sad. It's sad. I mean, whatever your views are on what we're discussing, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, you do understand and do believe in the aspects of these old cities, but it's the actual decline, the way society's got more ugly
yeah,
and more sort of like morbid, like depressing, the way the buildings are made. And
mm,
that in itself is a question we should ask. In an age of money, we should really be considering the fact we should be able to do anything. We should be able to achieve any style building, but yet we build these very ugly looking buildings and they're allowed to be built. And obviously, we're always told because of manufacturing costs and all this. Steve, is there anything else you'd like to add?
So I've said everything I want to say, to be honest. Yeah, that we've had we've really discussed everything. We've had a really great discussion. We've had a lot of information sharing going on here. So yeah, I haven't got anything else to say.
Well, I just say that this is what we need to consider. As I just said previously, we're living in an age where there's a very dark cloud over us at the moment, and we want to be looking at ways we can activate this energy and find ways we can
Absolutely.
actually bring this energy into ourselves. Now, these buildings create this energy and harness this energy, but we have this ability too. So we have this ability through getting into our natural rhythms and actually connecting with ourselves to actually connect with that energy, that higher source energy, and bring it into ourselves. And that's kind of what we got to keep doing at the moment, really. And it's what me and Steve wanted to do with this podcast was just kind of inspire people to look at
Yeah,
the world in an inspiring way instead of looking at them dark buildings, them kind of big morbid monoliths hanging over the sky,
yeah,
and and actually see that this beauty is there, and we're just reactivating that, and that's what we've got to do, right? And
that's
we've got
right.
to bring that energy into our lives now, and that takes some work. We are going through, as I said, the dark cloud, but to bring that light into ourselves, we can bring that light out and resonate positively, as
Yeah.
positively as we can.
Well, they
um
say before really the divine light really starts to shimmer here on planet Earth. I think a lot of darkness needs to rise, and the collective unconscious needs a lot of healing on planet Earth before we really start to prepare to enter into this golden age or golden period around 2034 to 2035. And that's just part of an ongoing process where there is so much that happens when it comes to frequencies, vibrations, and energetic resonances. It's all part of the experientiality of millions of soul personalities who have been chosen to incarnate and be defined as Homo sapiens or human beings here on planet Earth. And that's really all I've got to say. Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant, Stephen. Well, look, it's excellent. Well, look, thank you everyone for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the members section or become a patron. It really helps with the channel and help us make more content. We'll be bringing some guests on very soon, so that is all in process. Illuminous Worlds, that's our book out at the moment, and that's available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. And you can also purchase through my website very soon. Thank you, brother. It's been amazing as always, and
That's all right.
we've touched on some brilliant subjects. I love chatting with you. It is very inspiring. I really know we're inspiring everybody else, so that's really fantastic.
Absolutely. Yes, we are. Yes.
But it's bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.